Behind the polished façade of Buckingham Palace, a chilling order surfaced, one that would ignite a storm. Whispers of an internal declaration had begun spreading. The royal train, long a symbol of power and prestige, would now serve only one royal. And her name wasn't Camilla. This wasn't just logistics, it was a statement that left Camilla reeling. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. The royal train, a vessel steeped in royal tradition and dignity, had for generations served as a subtle yet unmistakable signal of power. It wasn't just a mode of travel, it was a privilege, reserved only for those whose presence demanded reverence. For Camilla, Queen Consort, that privilege had always been assumed, never questioned. But then came the whisper. A quiet change of procedure, buried in the fine print of a confidential circulation to senior aides. Going forward, the royal train would be scheduled solely for the Princess of Wales. No justification, no discussion, just a directive. When Camilla's private office caught wind of the shift, confusion turned quickly to disbelief. Messages were sent, calls were made. The silence that followed was deafening. Those closest to her said she had to read the document 3 times before accepting what it implied that her name had been removed, her access revoked. What stung more was not the decision itself, but the way it was delivered, quietly, methodically, and without her consent. And most damning of all, sources revealed that King Charles had not been formally consulted before the restriction took effect. Either he had been bypassed, or worse, he had agreed silently. Catherine, Princess of Wales, had not requested the change. At least, not publicly. Yet it was her name that stood alone in the royal train access file. Her office did not deny the update, nor did they provide comment. Instead, they released a tightly worded statement about streamlining royal engagements and modernizing royal mobility. It was, to those reading between the lines, a calculated deflection. The move wasn't administrative, it was strategic, and Camilla wasn't buying the narrative of efficiency. Inside the palace, tensions rippled. Staffers described an atmosphere of total confusion and silent fury. Some were instructed not to speak of the change, while others were tasked with reinforcing the narrative of modernization. But beneath the surface, it was clear the balance had shifted. A silent but seismic adjustment in the royal pecking order had been made, and Camilla was no longer seated where she once believed herself to be. The royal train had always been a vessel of tradition. Now, it had become a symbol of Catherine's rising dominance and Camilla's quietly diminishing role. But the fury simmering behind closed doors would soon erupt publicly, and the consequences would tear deeper than anyone imagined. What began as murmurs turned into a blazing confrontation. In a corridor not far from the Queen's apartments, Camilla reportedly erupted in a moment that left seasoned staff stunned. Her anger wasn't just about a train, it was about relevance, control, and fear of being erased. The morning had started like any other. Quiet footfall across polished floors, muted greetings exchanged between aides. But the moment Camilla entered the hallway, flanked by her private secretary and a senior lady in waiting, everything changed. A senior logistics aide had been summoned, though he never expected the Queen Consort's voice to break through the silence like a storm. "Has she taken everything now?" she demanded, her voice trembling not from weakness, but from rage carefully contained for far too long. The words echoed through the corridor, and those who heard it froze. In that instant, the fury of a woman pushed to the brink was unmistakable. Witnesses described the scene as raw, and unlike anything they had seen during her reign. The composure, the practiced restraint, all of it vanished. She didn't pace, she stood firm. Camilla, Queen Consort of the United Kingdom, wasn't pleading, she was furious. Reports say she referenced the royal train directly, accusing staff of betrayal and calling the decision a deliberate humiliation. Her voice cracked only once when she spoke Catherine's name. The tone carried something far deeper than jealousy, it carried loss. Not of a train, but of stature, of recognition, of a place she believed had been earned. Palace aides scrambled behind the scenes. Immediate orders were issued to downplay the incident, to keep the confrontation quiet. Staff were reminded of confidentiality agreements, while others were rotated off Camilla's immediate detail without warning. But word had already spread. The outburst had exposed more than frustration, it had exposed fracture. And within that fracture, a deeper truth emerged. Camilla had never felt secure, not even after being crowned beside her husband, not with Catherine's popularity soaring, not with decisions being made without her signature. It was in this emotionally charged eruption that a troubling pattern became clear. Those in the palace were now forced to choose, whether consciously or not. Catherine's rise wasn't just symbolic anymore, it was logistical, operational, real. Senior staff began questioning loyalties, whispering about who had the king's ear and who did not. The air grew tense, divided, uncertain. Every conversation was measured, every silence felt loaded, and Camilla, once surrounded by decades-old loyalty, was now met with eyes that no longer dared meet hers. She demanded an audience, not just with Charles, but with senior members of the council who overs all ceremonial affairs. Her team pushed for an emergency clarification. None came. Instead, she received a reply marked "Noted, nothing more." Her hands trembled not from anger this time, but from the hollow weight of silence. A silence that echoed the one thing she feared most, that her authority was not only being questioned but intentionally ignored. That the monarchy she fought so hard to be accepted into was preparing to move forward without her in its future-facing portrait. And as her demands fell into a chilling silence, Camilla realized something far more dangerous was brewing behind palace walls. While Camilla battled behind the scenes, Catherine remained calm, composed, and unshakably quiet. But her silence wasn't weakness, it was strategy. And now, it was being rewarded in ways the public could barely comprehend. For years, Catherine had mastered the art of elegant restraint. In a palace fueled by whispers and positioning, she had never chased attention. She had never needed to. Her loyalty to the crown, to duty, and above all, to the monarchy's future, had built a reputation that no title alone could secure. While others grasped for power through force or outburst, she allowed time, trust, and tradition to work in her favor. And when the royal train decision was finalized, no one inside the palace questioned it, not because it was forced upon them, but because it felt inevitable. A quiet, seamless shift that said more than any public statement ever could. Behind closed doors, senior advisors praised her approach. Consistency, not chaos. They echoed an undeniable contrast to the waves of turbulence that had followed Camilla in recent months. The advisors who had once hesitated to place full trust in a future queen were now stepping forward, pointing to Catherine's quiet influence as the steady hand the monarchy desperately needed. But what most didn't know was that weeks before the royal train decision went public, Catherine had already been briefed. A confidential meeting with senior transportation officials had taken place under the guise of reviewing royal engagement protocols. In truth, it had been about more than schedules. It had been about symbolism, and that symbolism wasn't lost on Princess Anne. Known for her blunt wisdom and unwavering loyalty to the crown, Anne had reportedly taken Catherine aside in private and offered what sources called the strongest endorsement yet. Encouraging her to accept the train's exclusivity wasn't about transportation, it was about readiness. Anne, ever the guardian of tradition, was signaling something far more powerful, that Catherine was not just a consort in waiting. She was, in every operational sense, already stepping into the role of sovereign in practice. Meanwhile, King Charles's position remained curiously ambiguous. He neither championed Camilla's protest nor publicly acknowledged Catherine's new privilege. Instead, he retreated behind official scheduling statements and vague allusions to modernizing the royal household. But for those watching closely, his silence said enough. It wasn't disapproval. It was quiet consent. A father torn between roles, allowing time to choose what he would not say out loud. And so, the royal train, once a symbol of shared legacy, became something else entirely. It became the railway of the future. Not just in metal and motion, but in meaning. The M.O. Narchi was shifting subtly, decisively, and Catherine was at the helm of that shift. The move wasn't just strategic, it was seismic. And as her schedule quietly filled with exclusive privileges once reserved for reigning queens, the message became clear: The future wasn't waiting, it was already arriving. But while Catherine's star rose, others within the monarchy feared the shadows growing around them, and they weren't wrong to fear what came next. In a twist no one saw coming, an internal memo was mistakenly sent to a former aide, one now estranged from the inner circle. Its contents were explosive, and its implications devastating. It wasn't just a decision, it was a directive. The memo was never meant to see the light of day. Marked as confidential and routed through secure palace channels, it should have been handled with discretion. But in the labyrinth of royal administration, one wrong click unraveled everything. The recipient, once a loyal aide to a senior household figure, now quietly dismissed after a rumored internal clash, recognized the document for what it was, a blueprint of the monarchy's shifting tide. The date on the header said it all. The royal train restriction had been finalized weeks before Catherine was even briefed, and far before Camilla ever raised her voice in the corridor. This wasn't a reaction to crisis, it was premeditated. The language was unambiguous. The royal train was to be exclusively reserved for the Princess of Wales, effective immediately, with no exceptions. But it was the supporting clause that raised the alarm, in alignment with future planning for Queen-in-Waiting protocols. Those 6 words detonated like a bomb within the palace. Already fragile ecosystem. There had been speculation certainly about Catherine's expanding role, but this was confirmation, deliberate, institutionalized, and recorded in writing. This wasn't about a train, this was about a transition. The absence of Camilla's name in the entire document spoke louder than any accusation. Nowhere was she included in travel preparations. Nowhere was she referenced in ceremonial scheduling. A figure once central to royal appearances had been completely omitted. It was not an oversight, it was surgical. A quiet erasure dressed in bureaucratic formality. The origin of the leak became the next crisis. Within hours, a controlled fire turned into a full-blown inferno. The memo had been forwarded to a mid-level official, rumored to be aligned with Princess Anne's inner circle. Whether deliberate or accidental remained unclear, but what was undeniable was the consequence. Damage control departments went into overdrive. Meetings were rescheduled, press lines were rehearsed, and in the background, trust within the palace corridors began to fracture. The Queen Consort's team reportedly demanded an internal investigation, but the order was quietly stalled. No one wanted to dredge deeper, because no one wanted to admit how long these changes had been in motion. The leak had confirmed what whispers only dared to suggest. The royal house was preparing for a future that Camilla would not lead. And yet, the silence from Catherine's office remained intact. Not a word of rebuttal, no denial, no confirmation, just the steady forward march of appearances, handshakes, and perfectly timed engagements. It was the kind of calm that unsettled, because it was no longer the storm that frightened those watching closely, it was the certainty of what followed it. The leak couldn't be contained, and what it exposed sent ripples through the family that could no longer be denied or buried. Loyalty within the monarchy is rarely straightforward. As Camilla searched for allies, many turned away or stayed strategically silent. In royal warfare, silence is betrayal, and suddenly the Queen Consort found herself frighteningly alone. She had expected at least quiet support from those she'd once stood beside. But when the train controversy exploded into an internal spectacle, the very walls she had leaned on for stability gave her nothing to hold on to. Prince Edward and Sophie, long known for their diplomacy, maintained a neutral position. Privately, they expressed regret that things had escalated to this point, but when pressed to comment or intervene, they declined. Their refusal wasn't personal, it was calculated. They had watched the tide turn and were not prepared to be swept away by it. Princess Anne, Camilla's sister-in-law and longtime symbol of unshakable tradition, was reportedly approached for a statement of reassurance. Instead, she gave what aides described as a cold dismissal, no comment. For Camilla, it was more than a disappointment, it was a gut punch. Anne's silence was never accidental, it was deliberate, and in that moment it became unmistakably clear where her allegiance now lay. She would protect the monarchy, not the Queen Consort. Meanwhile, William made no attempt to mask his support for Catherine. Behind closed doors, he doubled down on her increased visibility and authority, telling aides the royal family needed CLA. Not confusion. His words were interpreted as a direct rebuke of the chaos that had followed Camilla's outburst and the subsequent leak. For those watching the internal power dynamics, it was as clear as a coronation oath William was staking the future firmly in Catherine's hands. Across the Atlantic, Prince Harry's silence rang even louder. While his recent distance from royal operations might have excused his lack of response, insiders revealed he had been briefed on the train controversy, and still, he said nothing. No messages of solidarity, no nod to his father's wife. The absence of outreach wasn't ignored, it was interpreted as strategic distancing, a quiet message that even from afar, he wouldn't be drawn into Camilla's crisis. And in that vacuum, Camilla found herself without the shield she once imagined Harry might provide. Only a sparse handful from her old circle dared speak on her behalf. A former courtier issued a mild defense in the press, calling the train decision unnecessarily cruel, but the message was quickly buried beneath stories of Catherine's growing role. Other voices stayed silent, afraid of the shifting winds. Staff whispered about the growing gap between Camilla and the institution she once seemed to master. The whispers weren't idle, they were assessments, calculations. And the general consensus was devastating. This was Camilla's first visible defeat. It wasn't just that she had lost access to a royal train, it was the realization that no one would fight to give it back to her, that her cries of injustice had echoed through empty corridors, and that behind her title there now stood no army, just shadows. As support faded and whispers, "Gah, you," louder, Camilla knew she needed a counter-move fast. But what she attempted next would only deepen the rift. Camilla wasn't finished, not by a long shot. In a private gathering, she floated a proposal that stunned those in attendance. If she couldn't access the royal train, she would make it irrelevant, but in doing so, she crossed a line few ever dared approach. In the aftermath of silence, exile, and crumbling support, Camilla did what she'd always done in times of uncertainty: she fought back. But this time, the weapon wasn't fury. It was policy. Camilla summoned a select circle of aides, communications advisors, and one trusted logistics official to a private session. On the table was a proposal that would rattle the very bones of royal tradition, decommission the royal train entirely, disguise it under the banner of modernization and austerity, frame it as a bold, progressive cut in response to national economic concerns. She would champion efficiency, speak for the people, and undercut the train's symbolic weight in one move. Her suggestion caught even her closest allies off guard. The royal train wasn't merely transportation, it was history on wheels, a living artifact of continuity, prestige, and the mystique of monarchy. To strip it away wasn't just logistical, it was sacrilegious. But Camilla, cornered and desperate, was prepared to gamble it all. If she couldn't ride it, no one should. She proposed launching a new royal mobility strategy, under her leadership emphasizing green vehicles, modern optics, and accessible travel initiatives. It wasn't subtle, it was scorched earth. But the backlash was swift. Parliament advisors, already wary of Camilla's increasing friction with the press, urged immediate caution. Decommissioning the royal train, especially after the public had learned of its reallocation to Catherine, would only fan flames. Critics would frame it as jealousy, not reform. Her attempt to own the narrative would instead confirm the one already circulating, that she was unraveling. Senior royal staff were no kinder. Some outright refused to entertain the discussion, citing the historical significance of the train and the Queen's own fondness for it. One advisor warned that dismantling a legacy simply because it no longer served her would be the final crack in her public image. But Camilla pushed forward, instructing her PR team to quietly prepare briefing notes in case the plan moved ahead. What she hadn't accounted for was the leak. Within days, media outlets got wind of the proposal. The reaction was brutal. Public sentiment, already sympathetic to Catherine's steady rise, turned cold. Headlines questioned Camilla's judgment, accusing her of letting personal grievances dictate public policy. Social media exploded with fury. Royalists called the move petty, spiteful, and disgracefully short-sighted. Commentators began to wonder aloud if the Queen Consort had lost touch with the values the crown was meant to uphold. And then, came the final blow, Charles. Sources confirmed that upon learning of the plan, the king summoned Camilla in private and told her, point blank, to stand down quietly. His ton. He was not one of negotiation, it was a command. He could not, and would not, allow personal vendettas to jeopardize the institution. For the first time since her coronation, Camilla found herself staring at a wall she couldn't scale. Behind the scenes, panic gripped her press team. Scheduled appearances were re-evaluated, damage control memos were drafted, but nothing could reverse the perception now solidifying in the public's mind that Camilla had crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. But with each move, Camilla wasn't just losing public ground, she was losing something far more dangerous, her standing behind the palace gates. King Charles had always balanced on a tightrope between love and leadership, between modern monarchy and traditional expectations. But as the royal train crisis intensified, his silence became louder than words. And behind that silence, a father, a husband, a sovereign cracking. Inside the palace, behind doors shut to the public and press, Charles faced a decision that tore at every corner of his identity. In the span of days, he held private audiences with both Camilla and Catherine. The first meeting with Camilla was marked by emotions, some say desperation. She pleaded not just for clarity, but for recognition. She asked what many had already begun whispering behind her back. Was she still central to the vision of the crown? Or had she already been phased out? Her voice didn't shake when she demanded he issue a public statement correcting the narrative, but his answer, quiet, uncertain, was more painful than any denial. He told her that public perception was a force he could no longer fight. With Catherine, the meeting was different, quieter. Not a discussion, but an acknowledgement. Those close to the king say he didn't offer praise, nor apologies, only gratitude. There was no need for explanation. The storm around the royal train had already revealed where the future was heading. Catherine, with her silence and strength, had earned a place that no title could bestow. And Charles, weary from the fight between what was and what must be, no longer stood in its way. Behind the scenes, the toll was becoming visible. Staff noted moments where the king sat alone in the gallery for extended periods, unmoving. Aides found him staring out windows with papers in hand, reading the same page over and over again. Some reported him breaking down once during a call with the Chancellor, another during a late-night walk through Clarence House. For a man long seen as composed, even stoic, these were signs of a sovereign stretched to the breaking point. Not because of policy, but because he had to choose between two versions of the monarchy, one tied to a promise of devotion, the other to survival. Senior aides knew the stakes. They urged him to take a position publicly in favor of streamlining, modernization, and Catherine's increasing role. The royal train, they argued, had become more than a travel dispute. It was now a symbol of succession, a message to the public and the institution that the transition of influence had already begun. But Charles couldn't bring himself to make the declaration Camilla demanded. He refused to endorse her statement. He refused to deny it either, and in that void, everything became louder. Camilla's demand for public reassurance went unanswered. Her calls for a clear rebuttal of the leaks and the rumors were met with palace silence. That silence, however, wasn't neutral, it was decisive. The king may not have spoken with words, but his inaction had delivered the clearest message yet. The monarchy was shifting, and not even his personal loyalties could stop it. He hadn't chosen sides out loud, but the institution had. And in the reflection of that quiet collapse, Charles stood not only as a ruler, but as a man watching the cost of every compromise he had ever made. And in that silence, Catherine's path cleared, while Camilla's grew darker. But no one expected what would happen next, not even the king. On a crisp morning, with cameras stationed discreetly along the tracks, the royal train pulled into view. And when Catherine stepped onto the platform alone, everything changed. This wasn't just a journey, it was a declaration of future power. And Camilla watched in silence. No grand proclamation had been made, no official announcement preceded it, and yet as Catherine, Princess of Wales, descended from the royal train to begin a solo engagement tied to a national children's education initiative, it became instantly clear The monarchy had pivoted. There was a palpable shift in energy, in posture, in presence. The cameras didn't need permission to linger on her. Public hunger for stability and inspiration had already crowned her long before the crown ever would. This wasn't simply a trip. It was theatre, strategy and symbolism perfectly intertwined. It was the moment the public stopped asking if Catherine would take the reins and began to wonder when. Her appearance had been meticulously planned. Not by her, but by a machine that now moved in step with her. The journey, tied to literacy and rural access to schooling, was rooted in compassion and policy. But no one missed the deeper message. She was leading the next generation, literally and metaphorically. And she was doing it alone. The royal train, once shared by the most senior royals, now carried only her. There was no mention of Camilla. No questions about absence, just headlines that glowed with admiration. Social feeds surged with praise. Commentators described her as the people's modern queen, a regal force without the need for spectacle, and perhaps most poignantly, the inevitable. Back in Windsor, Camilla had returned to the castle hours earlier. She was seen by staff but said nothing. Her expression, according to one insider, was unreadable. But those who knew her best recognized the silence not as calm but as surrender. She had no appearance to make, no statement to offer. The spotlight had moved, and with it, so had the weight of relevance. King Charles's absence from the event said even more than his presence might have. The monarch, usually eager to stand beside his consort or lend symbolic weight to such initiatives, remained behind palace walls. There was no commentary from his office, no endorsement, no accompanying photograph. Whether it was intentional restraint or a quiet resignation to the inevitable, his decision left one message carved into the moment: Catherine didn't need anyone beside her. She had become a force entirely on her own. The press wasted no time. The torch has been passed, one royal columnist wrote, not in title but in truth. The words echoed across networks, publications and private forums. It wasn't about power snatched, it was about pow. Naturally gravitating. No ceremony could ever rival what had just unfolded in public view. But behind the train's slow departure lay a quiet reckoning, because the final act was still to come, and it would forever redefine the royal order. Weeks after the train journey, a newly updated royal travel registry surfaced without Camilla's name anywhere in it. Not once, not for spring, not for summer. It was the final freeze. A quiet, calculated deletion, and it marked the end of a chapter Camilla never expected to close. It wasn't a headline. It wasn't even an announcement. But to those who understood the inner workings of the monarchy, it was as loud as a thunderclap. The updated Royal Travel Registry, quietly made available to internal departments and select logistical partners, outlined the official engagements and transportation plans for the months ahead. Catherine's name appeared again and again: public visits, ceremonial appearances, travel routes confirmed aboard the royal train. But Camilla? Not a single entry, no footnote, no pending engagements. She had been removed from the map without warning, without explanation, and most painfully, without recourse. Palace aides offered the explanation swiftly. The registry reflected a new strategy of a streamlined monarchy, focusing on future-facing engagements and roles that reinforce modern relevance. But behind the polished language, insiders weren't fooled. This wasn't just streamlining, it was a surgical transition. Camilla's removal wasn't a clerical change, it was a deliberate omission, and once it was spotted, it could not be unseen. For royal watchers and institutional analysts alike, it was clear the shift was intent. Final, irreversible, and symbolically final. Camilla's team acted fast, trying to minimize the damage. A brief, controlled statement claimed she was focusing on private initiatives and choosing to avoid overlap with younger royals for efficiency. But the press wasn't buying it. Headlines leaned into the narrative of a queen consort being quietly phased out, one engagement at a time. Articles questioned how such a senior figure could be so conspicuously absent from official travel. And every time the royal train moved without her, the silence became more brutal. Meanwhile, Catherine's circle began expanding their scope behind the scenes. Advisors were briefed on new ceremonial responsibilities. Advance teams quietly mapped out international tours with Catherine as the lead royal presence. No fanfare, no declarations, just motion decisive, unstoppable. And with every scheduled journey, the whispers grew louder. Modern Queen-in-Waiting protocol, some called it. But for Camilla, the phrase carried an unbearable sting, because no one was waiting anymore. The change wasn't coming. It had come. What began as whispers had become structure. What had looked like symbolic moments now hardened into policy. And what Camilla had once feared had finally unfolded in cold clarity, not through confrontation, not through scandal, but through erasure, deliberate, unspoken, final. She had not lost her title, but she had lost the movement, the momentum, and the relevance that once came with it. And so, with one final document, the power struggle found its quiet end not with an explosion, but with erasure. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.